was 10 or 11 when I began to feel real pain from life. For a long time, I was angry and confused, but I'm beginning to understand. It was around that time when I really became self-conscious, when I really started to hate myself. I'd never experienced real bullying until then. In elementary school, I'd been pushed around some, but by middle school, they had gone into my head. They told me I'd be homeless when I grew up. They called me fat little faggot every day. They drew pictures of me getting mutilated in art class. Simultaneously, many of my close friends from previous years grew distant, getting girlfriends or joining groups of more popular kids. I was overweight. I had a bad haircut. I dressed in hand-me-down jeans and comic book t-shirts. No girls would even talk to me, let alone date. Why was I like this? Why was the world like this? I'd been raised a Christian and I wanted God to protect me, but even as I prayed, things got worse. As time seemed to accelerate quicker and quicker, my feelings of hatred for myself and the world grew stronger and stronger. By the time I was 13 and officially a teenager, I knew I could not continue this way. When God hadn't changed my life for me, I rejected His existence to change my life myself. I looked at what I didn't have: a good body, attention, sex, money, popularity, recognition, freedom. I developed the expectation that if I was unhappy without these things, I would be happy with them. So I began a long and arduous process of working towards them, working towards pleasure. The first step was my body. In the summer of 2012, I began a strict regimen of caloric measurement and exercise. By the time I returned to school in the fall, I had lost so much weight that my guidance counselor called me down to ask if I had anorexia. Of course, I denied this. Whether I did or I did not, this was the beginning of a long pattern of denying that I had mental health issues. My new appearance was successful in generating interest from women, and I got my first girlfriend. The very noticeable difference in attention before and after my physical transformation cemented the connection between appearance and self-worth to me. Around this same time, I began consuming pornography compulsively. Prior to this, my intake had been limited by moral or religious guilt. This was the first of many addictions. Meanwhile, I grew intensely focused on my performance in school and social situations. I felt that I needed good grades, not really for any future plans, as my only aspiration in life at this point was to become a millionaire, but for the attention and approval that they brought me from adults. I felt that I needed similar approval from my peers for who I knew and what I did. I started drinking and smoking weed in 10th grade, behaviors earlier limited by a similar guilt to pornography, but for weed especially, it was immediately more than a means to social approval. I found I liked getting high more than anything I had ever felt before. Smoke enough, and the pain was numbed for hours at a time. I didn't have to think about anything except what was right in front of me. My use increased dramatically, as did the time I spent with older kids. Soon I was going to parties with 12th graders almost every weekend. Older girls started asking me what I was doing for the night, not the other way around. For a time, I succeeded in juggling this life which I hid from my parents with the self that I showed them and my teachers. But soon, the pain returned with a vengeance. Aware of my use and concerned with the people I was associating with, my sister informed my parents of what I had been up to right before the summer began. I cared deeply about what my parents thought of me up to that point, and suddenly their opinion had changed in an instant. Hurting them made me want to hurt myself, and for a time, this desire overcame the desire to rehabilitate their opinion. I burrowed deeper into my addiction, beginning with alcohol, as weed was now on their radar and harder to obtain. I got drunk at my sister's graduation party, getting me grounded. After that, I started to sneak out, attending parties with my older friends and getting as wasted as possible before sneaking back in the morning. On the 4th of July, I blacked out for the first time. I woke up in the hospital, surrounded by doctors and my parents. My friends had left me on my front porch unconscious. After that, I was no longer permitted a social life. My parents moved me to the upstairs floor of the house and did not allow me internet access. The isolation made the pain worse, and feeling as though I had no recourse to the other pleasures I had found, I chose to dive deeper into drugs. I had been experimenting with over-the-counter cough medicine for some time, but without access to other drugs, my use intensified greatly. The active ingredient in Robitussin, dextromorphan, also known as DXM, is a dissociative and has a similar effect to ketamine. At high doses, you have vivid hallucinations and out-of-body experiences. During my trips, I was able to escape my situation. Whereas weed had numbed the pain, on DXM, the world was transformed so completely that I forgot what was happening beyond the high. The greater the dosage and frequency of use, the more I was able to escape. Eventually, on the day that my parents suggested I might start to get some freedom back, I took enough to potentially overdose. By now I was 16 years old. Unconscious and unresponsive until late the next evening, my parents found the empty pill bottles in my backpack. I don't remember much of the reaction, except me crying that I didn't want to be like this. Despite all the decisions I had made before and after, it's still one of the most truthful things I've ever said. I quickly found myself enrolled in an intensive outpatient program for teens with mental health issues. I had been seeing a psychologist, but I had told her little about how I actually felt, which would not change for several years. Even in the outpatient program, I denied that it was a suicide attempt. But I realized that if I was to regain my freedom and get the pleasure I wanted out of life, I would need to change more than what I said to people. I would need to change my behavior. Sacrificing my present desires in order to regain the trust of my parents, I did what my therapists told me to do. On the surface, I was doing great. I got into a steady relationship with a supportive girl my parents knew and liked, devoted myself to school with a renewed intensity, got a job at a local coffee house, went to my psychologist on a regular basis, went to the gym as much as possible, largely stayed away from weed, and worked on creative projects with childhood friends. But inside, there was a monster. Unable to feed it in the present, I fueled its power with past memories and fantasies of the future. Although I still smoked on occasion and attended some parties, I largely repressed this monster until I was 18 and leaving my small town to enter the real world. I broke up with the girlfriend who had gotten me through the past 2 years, coldly rejecting commitment to others and feelings of love. I tried to find pleasure with her, but it just turned to pain as well. I think that in some ways, more than anyone else, she could see what was wriggling under the surface. Some part of me felt bad for leaving her behind, but the monster was quickly taking control. The relationship had lasted a year and a half, but within 2 weeks I was fucking random girls from Tinder. I enrolled in a prestigious university to study business, where my obsession with academic and financial success would be encouraged. I moved to Montreal, where alcohol was legal, weed was soon to be, harder drugs were available, and most importantly, my parents wouldn't be there to interfere. Once at university, I would orient all my relationships around pleasure seeking. Who went out the most? Who had drugs? Who wanted to fuck me? But most of all, in June of 2017, I started a company. Having been focused on how my appearance affected people for so long, it seemed like a logical step to create my own clothing and brand image to achieve the results I desired. I named the organization Ghoul. I created several graphics for the brand. I could not define their meaning, but I knew they felt powerful to me. The first was the Ghoulboy, a stylized humanoid composed of a head, a body with an inverted cross at the center, and 2 limbs. Although at the time when I drew it, emotions felt automatic and without thought, I quickly came to refer to it as a self-portrait. Soon after, I had the inverted cross tattooed on my back to solidify this with myself. For a time, college seemed the hedonic paradise I'd fantasized about, but the magic did not last long. I found my mental health devolving quickly. I began to grow desensitized to the pleasure I sought after. My experiences grew less and less satisfying, and the pain I felt in between them grew more and more unbearable. My grades mattered only to keep me from failing out. I realized I only mattered to my friends in the same way that they mattered to me, sources of pleasure. I continued to produce clothing for Ghoul, but found it difficult to grow my audience or even explain the brand to those interested. To deal with these feelings, my drug habits steadily worsened and expanded in scope. I smoked weed and dabs to numb myself. When this was not enough, I discovered what would become my worst addiction yet, Xanax. Whereas DXM transformed the world to distract me from it, Xans, particularly when combined with alcohol, shut it off completely. I felt nothing, remembered nothing, was nothing. To preserve the illusion of happiness to those around me, I did cocaine and took MDMA, plastering my face with an artificial smile. During the darkest time in my life, there was rarely a picture taken of me where I wasn't grinning ear to ear. But the darkness came out in full force through my artistic material. By then, largely a private exorcism. My drug use led to several serious injuries, and I contemplated suicide for the first time in years. Yet something kept me alive. Something inside, besides the monster, propelled me forward. Soon the cognitive dissonance of the desire for self-annihilation and the unknown force keeping me going reached a peak. I was arrested and upon release underwent a destructive mental breakdown, lashing out against many of the people I held closest. But when even this did not destroy me, when I woke up, back in the world, I knew I had to find a meaning in life, a purpose for going through all of this. I began to study and write about my experiences and the observed experiences of others. Although I cannot fully explain the results here, the central insights that make up my current life and my vision of the future can be revealed. I was able to finally connect the monster I felt inside me, which I believe is in all of us, to my brand's name, Ghoul. While retrospectively this may seem clear, at the time my feelings were so abstract that I could not nail down what even this name truly meant to me. This Ghoul, this monster, was the same pleasure-seeking, pain-aversion force which had controlled my life for the past 10 years, which I had embodied and carried to its limit. I saw this same monster affecting many of the people I knew. I saw that if I could make an example of myself, I could show them that there was another world beyond the monster, beyond Ghoul. And so, Ghoul RIP was born, a new organization concerned not with giving myself up to the inner darkness, but harnessing it, allowing me to finally rest in peace. The Ghoulboy remained as the primary symbol, but it no longer solely represented myself. It became symbolic of the nature of all of human existence. One limb represented the Ghoul force towards pleasure-seeking and pain aversion, the other the true being, a force towards purpose and fulfillment. The head represents our individual identity, the controlling consciousness that enables us to make choices as to which forces we allow to pull us through life. The body represents the physical form through which these forces act upon us, and we act upon them. The brand's audience would no longer be onlookers to my nosedive into darkness or mere sources of profit, but recognizers of the human condition represented by the brand. The clothing would be more than a superficial aesthetic or a product to sell. It would be an outward manifestation of this recognition. A zine was created to begin outlining my struggles in poetry and establish a philosophical methodology for becoming conscious. I identify the driving force towards my meaning in life as the aforementioned true being, which I also believe is in all of us, the following of which requires the harnessing of the Ghoul force in order to redefine pleasure and pain away from impulse and towards the purpose found in examining our true self. A 3D form of myself, still dubbed the Ghoulboy, was made to represent how we create ourselves as humans within the existence structure of the Ghoulboy symbol. The effort to survive continues, but it feels as though, for the first time, I am being truly purposeful. I want to die, but I have to live.